Welcome to Evolvepreneur Podcast Show. My very special guest today is Bea Wray, who's dazzled audiences for 20 years speaking about entrepreneurship, leadership and women in business. She's the author of What Harvard Taught Me, But My Kids Made Me Learn, and is also co-founder of Millennial Women's Network, empowering and mentoring women in 24 countries. And she's also launched several high-tech and non-tech companies. Welcome, Bea, to the show.
Hey, so happy to be here. Thank you so much.
That's great. So I had a bit of a look at your website and sort of a bit of a feeling for what you're about. So certainly I think we've got some topics we can talk about that relates to entrepreneurs, because I think it's pretty much seems like it's in your blood. And let's probably have a conversation about that later as to whether you think you're born an entrepreneur or whether you actually become one. So tell me a little bit about your background. How did you sort of get to where you are now? What's your and what you're doing now?
Sure. Well, thank you. So I have a love for the entrepreneur. I really have a love for the individual. And what I find is individuals love to solve problems, and the more power you can give them, the better. So I'm not a big company person, although I have been in innovation in large companies, and I've done some work with what we might call entrepreneurship. But most of my career, I have either been starting a company, been a co-founder of a company. I've been a mentor, an investor, a coach. So that is really my heart, is helping people take ideas, the chance to solve a problem and monetize that and figuring out how to start a business.
Right. So as a kid, were there signs that you're going to be an entrepreneur, or was it like something that...
That's such a great question. Thank you for that. So I think the first company I started, in air quotes, I was living in New Jersey. I think I was in about the 5th grade. And at that point, of course, earlier in my life, I had paper routes with my brother. So I was always looking for ways to make money, and I'd been babysitting and walking dogs. But it wasn't until the 5th grade, which is 10 or 11 years old, that I did start a newspaper. I took a regular 8.5 by 11 sheet of newspaper, and I cut it into about, divided it into about 10 spots. And I went around to the neighborhood. There was a barber, there was a deli, there was a handful of other things. And I said, if you pay me $2.50, I'll draw a picture with your phone number, and I'll make 38 photocopies, and I'll put them in the mailboxes in my neighborhood. And so I actually made a little money. There was no news. There was nothing I was reporting. It was just like a little booklet of coupons, but that was my first endeavor. And around then, maybe a year later, I was sitting at the pool and heard some housewives talking about how they hated to iron shirts. They didn't like to iron the men's shirts, and the dry cleaner made them too stiff. And I thought, I can do this. So I used to watch a soap opera. At the time, it was called General Hospital.
Still going, isn't it? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Those were the days of Luke and Laura, and I would stand. I got $75 per shirt. I could do about 4 an hour. And I walked over to the neighbor's house, picked up the shirts, watched General Hospital, ironed them, and delivered them back. And so that was my second little business.
Right.
But I was always looking at little businesses, so much so that my mom kind of scolded me. And she said, Bea, the neighbors are bringing us bags of apples. They think your father has lost his job. You need to stop this.
Funny how word gets out.
Yeah. So.
I think I was a kid. When I was a kid, I probably was about 11, 12-ish. I think I started. We had a lot of chooks, so I was on a railway siding, so population 3 people, but we owned the post office, or had license to local post office. So everybody in the everybody from all around had come to the post office, and basically we had all these chooks, and I thought I could sell these eggs because everybody wanted so I'd sell the eggs across the counter. So. And we had quite a lot of chooks, so I'd have a lot of eggs going through, and I was charging like $2 a dozen or whatever. And then after a while, my mother said to me, "Hey, you really need to be paying for these eggs, because basically, you feed the chooks and stuff like that." And so I decided, because I couldn't make 100% profit, I would just stop doing it. So that was the end of it. But I used to sort of when I was younger, I used to sort of make believe I had a business and record sales and do all that kind of stuff. So I think it's a kind of a little kind of, I don't know, trait, or a kind of a thing that you start listening to people but from a different perspective as a problem solver rather than just saying, oh yeah, okay, poor you or whatever. You kind of look at solving their problem, and I think there's a lot of money to be made in solving people's problems.
For sure.
Rather than try and create.
I ran a nonprofit for many years out of a town called Savannah, Georgia, and the organization was called The Creative Coast. It was funded by the Economic Development Office, and we served over 300 people that were more like idea stage entrepreneurs. But the very first question we always ask is, what problem are you solving? What problem are you solving? Because if there are 6 other competitors, maybe we don't need a 7th. If there's something that someone can do inside their organization, you probably don't want to hire someone from outside. But if you can understand, and in this situation when I was 11 years old, it was these women, the men didn't want overstarched shirts and the women didn't want to iron them. And so I had an easy solution and it worked. But if you can figure out what is the problem and find a way to solve it, and that's really the best part. That's the mindset of the fun of being in a startup, because then you're solving different problems all day long. You know, you're answering the marketing puzzle. You're answering, when do you pivot? Boy, in the land of COVID right now in quarantine, every company's had to have a long list of different problems that we're solving in different ways. And thank God, you know, you got to have that mindset early on that you're not going to wait around for someone to hand you the answer, but you're going to start figuring out the answer.
And it's interesting, even in Australia, like the government sort of like had a scenario where they were going to give money to the businesses, but they said, oh, we'll pay you in about 6 weeks' time. So can you keep the employees on, but we'll pay you the money in 6 weeks' time? And it just showed you very clearly that governments have no clue how small business operates. 6 weeks is like a year probably in government, right? You know, you can't, 2 weeks is a long time without any money coming in. 6 weeks is almost impossible. And I think that they sort of like eventually started getting it moving and sort of now they've got a thing called JobKeeper where they actually pay the wages of the employees, and they're starting to try and take it away from businesses. And the danger is that most businesses probably got a bit lazy and they didn't think, oh, well, I'll just get this money and I'll survive and I won't change. And I think that's the difference between, to me, a business owner and an entrepreneur. A business owner will tend to run a business the way they run a business, but an entrepreneur will get in there and start making changes, and they'll start looking at opportunities. And I think that's the danger in this kind of scenario when you look at pivoting. You know, a lot of businesses can't pivot. They're not built to, right? Yeah. You know, like I've got a local sporting place I go to, and he won't change. He will not change. Like he still wants to keep running the same way. He wants to kind of look like he's changing, but he's not. And I think that's the danger in entrepreneurship. If you can't change, if you can't sort of say, hey, this ain't working, I need to change it before it gets you, I think it's a danger.
And so often we have to change in 2 or 3 or 4 different directions because we don't know which one is going to work. So, you know, I'm a public speaker or, you know, a keynote speaker. So, of course, immediately I was silly enough at first to think, oh, we were the one industry that was going to be hit. Well, it turns out every industry has been hit. But very quickly, myself and my colleagues, we moved to an online actual course like on Teachable, and I started doing Zoom talks, and we had to come up with really sort of 3 different potential revenue sources, and one was an absolute flop, but the other 2 were able to take hold. And I've watched some local businesses kind of do the same thing with, restaurants moved to, ditching their individual menus and just having like family style. So come over and buy a $50 meal, but you split it with your family. And that system had worked really well through COVID because you couldn't come in and eat in the restaurant, but we'll deliver it to you.
Because, I mean, a family meal typically isn't necessarily, broken into individual servings that are customized to them anyway. So, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And I think that's, in some respects, I think the restaurant industry is probably the one that's probably going to change the most. Because I think they're the ones who basically have got to survive out of this. And I think a lot of them have also got caught up in this whole, like, you got the same thing there, like Menulog and all those big companies where they actually charge a fairly big fee. Because in some respects, I think restaurants have been quite lazy with their marketing. Yes. Right? They kind of expect people to come see them, so they don't really worry about online. and then they get caught out, and then they've got no way to purchase online, so they rely on something like Menulog or Uber Eats and stuff like that, and they take 30%. And so suddenly you've got a real problem that they have never really had to solve before, and that's pricing something that actually, so I think it in some respects, I think this is going to make a lot of businesses better as a result. They're going to make them smarter, going to listen to the customer more maybe, rather than just go, well, here's it is, the chef does what he wants. He can do what he wants.
Listening is certainly important, especially in times of pivot. And it's actually something I talk about in my book, that I did attend the Harvard Business School. And what's so amazing there is the way the school is set up to make sure you become a great listener. So at my 5-year reunion, one of the professors said, hey, you all came here with a story to tell, but you left world-class listeners. The reason for that is it was in a classroom where you have the same 80 people for your whole first year. And the professor is an hour-and-a-half class. The professor is going to talk maybe 15 minutes of it. The rest is going to come from the other 79 people. And my grade depends on how much I contribute and how I build. So if I say something that someone else just said, those are points off of my grade. But if I say, you know what, I didn't actually agree with what John said, I feel more closely to what Suzanne said, now I'm, helping the class. And so we had to listen like crazy. Did that person make sense? Would I agree with it? In what ways do I disagree? And always be ready to contribute, but not overstate. And so that was a really, really powerful, immediate lesson that I have tried hard to take into every aspect of business is, can I listen a little bit longer? Can I ask some more probing questions? Am I understanding what this person is trying to say to me? Am I actually serving my client? Are they as happy as I think that they are? Or they're actually talking to the competitor?
Yeah, I mean, I think I learned that lesson early in business when I started an IT business, and I knew quite a bit of stuff. But what I didn't know was much about retail. Right, and so I went into this, I think it was like a hardware store kind of client, and he started talking about barcodes, and I had no clue what they were. Right? It's like, what the hell's a barcode? And so I started trying to wing my way through it, and then in the end he says to me, well, you obviously don't really know what you're talking about, like you don't know what a barcode is right there. And I said, no, not really. And he said, well, if you don't know what you're talking about, you shouldn't try to make it up. Right? And what I realized was that the difference between that was asking more questions. So what I actually developed was a checklist or a questionnaire list that was to go in there and ask the questions. So I never answered any questions in the first consultation. Never, hardly ever answer any questions. And my success rate went from probably, let's say, 40-50% strike rate to 80 to 90% strike rate.
Great.
Because I had a bunch of questions, and they were written in a certain way to kind of get emotion. So they were deep questions. And I think what happened then was that I didn't have to answer anything then. So I was automatically assumed I knew what I was talking about regardless of what happened then. And at the same time, they were heard, which I think most entrepreneurs don't get heard, right? So in some respects, their wife or partner doesn't listen to them because they don't really know what the hell this entrepreneur thing is. And other people are going to pay to listen to them, like accountants and stuff. So unless you're going and seeing someone, at the end of the day, only an entrepreneur can talk to another entrepreneur. And I think that was always the problem with most entrepreneurs. They don't really, no one listens to what they actually want to say. And so then by listening to them and asking them deep questions, they feel connected to you then, and away you go from there. So I think I learned early on, it's better be asking the questions than answering them, right? So particularly in
that's so good. That's so powerful. One of the things I try to talk to people about is, we typically train our sales staff on our 10 features and benefits. And whenever I do workshops, I ask people to write down, what are your features and benefits? And then I immediately have you draw a line through all of them. Because the reality is we don't ever need to share them. What I love to replace them with are 10 great questions, the kinds that you were asking, is that if we can train our sales staff how to ask questions about what's going on in the prospect's life, why they've bothered to call you, what solutions they've tried in the past, what would success be a year from now, who's involved in the decision-making process, whatever are their best 10 questions. If we can train those things, we'll do like you did, go from 10, 15, 20% success to 80, 90% conversion, because people need to be heard and understood for sure.
Yeah, and I think the thing is too, as you said about great questions, right? I remember reading a Tony Robbins book my sister gave me when I was quite young, and in there it says, to for a better life, ask better questions.
Oh, that's good.
And I think that's really where it comes down to is the ability to kind of ask a better question. And a lot of times we used to ask a question like along, and this is a great question to ask, I reckon, and can use it for anything, right? And that was, what is it, what does that mean? So if you're sort of like drilling into someone and says, well, I want to improve sales, well, what's that mean? And then
right.
What does that mean? What does that mean? Until you're drilling about 4 or 5 times, in the end, it's almost like there's the real reason behind it isn't driving revenue. It's either about security or about, buying something or going somewhere, doing something. So it's never really just about what they say at the front. So whatever they say, the first thing they say is usually nothing about what they really want. In my opinion, it's like they give you the standard answer and hope they can get away with it. And the reality is, as you drill in, you find out that there's more to it. And I think women are better with kids, right? Because kid tries to get away with an answer, and then you can tell he's lying. So just keep on digging in until you get the real answer.
Well, that is the entire premise of everything I speak about. Is the book "What an MBA Taught Me, But My Kids Made Me Learn" is really all of that. Is that there are things I've been taught, and I'm super blessed to have this expensive education. And then I've spent 20 odd years dealing with roughly 300 to 400 entrepreneurs over 24 different countries. So what I've found is so many of the questions and concerns are similar throughout. Some are different. But what I say is, but my kids made me learn. And you're exactly right, is that life is really, and business certainly, is all about people skills. And for me, raising kids was the greatest way to hone my own people skills. Questions is one aspect of it, but everything about listening, negotiation, collaboration, those were all things that had to be.
Kids super negotiators, right? It's like you can convince a 5-year-old to do something. I reckon you can convince anybody to do anything. Like, it's quite interesting when they kind of it's almost like they don't have no fear of failure. So basically, they know they just keep on asking until you give in, or keep on driving it until you get there. But I think that's probably the best thing that anybody can ever learn is how to negotiate with a 5-year-old. Because I reckon.
Well, I was at a 4-year-old's birthday party the other day, and we were at a water slide, and her parents said, would you like to go with Bea while mommy and daddy go on the big slide? She was having a fit. Of course she didn't want to do that, because it was presented to her as, we are going to do this fun thing that you don't get to do. And I said, oh, there's this pink slide over there. I feel like you know about that. Would you be able to teach me and take me over there? Immediately she went. We were gone, the two of us, for an hour, and her parents got to go on the big slide. But it was a perfect illustration of winning the negotiation by not negotiating, right? By setting up the framework in the way that we were going to lead for success.
Yeah, I was interested. I interviewed one of my book clients a few months ago, and they talked about a communication sandwich, and it was quite interesting because it's by the outer layers that you actually give them, rather than give them the sandwich itself, because the sandwich isn't very easy to eat without some outer layers. So by actually setting the scene up a bit and sort of like talking about how good they are or what you want them to help, they then go for what's inside. But otherwise, it's like, nope.
Right. No, that's so good.
Yeah. So one of the things that I probably I'm big on, and I've touched on before, was failure, right? So I think a lot of entrepreneurs, particularly early stage ones, I think after a while you've been in business, you realise, that failure is an option, not rather. And so what happens is I feel that failure isn't what it is. People fail at something and think they're going to do it ever again. And I think that's something they get taught at school too. Like, you're not supposed to fail at school. Like there's no, everything's set up to succeed. If you fail, it's a bad thing. But as soon as you start in life, that life is mostly failure, right? In some level or another.
So one thing I love to say is that entrepreneurs all have two master's degrees, one in success and one in failure. And I think entrepreneurs must know about failure because you have to be taking risks. Another thing I like to recognize is, so I've started many companies, been the co-founder of many companies, but only one successful exit. So I have some valuable, not pieces of paper where I have stock in some barely existent company. One time I sold a company and that afforded me 6 years off to be a stay-at-home mom. But I've plenty of failures. I actually dedicated an entire chapter to the book on failure and learning to, basically it's that failure can be fabulous. But one of the things I think also happens with entrepreneurs is the imposter syndrome, feeling like I'm an imposter. I'm not good enough. I don't belong at this board table or in this room with 900 people that I'm speaking to that might want my product, whatever it is. And what I believe is that if you've ever felt imposter syndrome, you should take a moment and pat yourself on the back. And the analogy I'd like to have is we have big oak trees here in South Carolina, is to think about an oak tree and how strong it is at its trunk, and then how it branches way, these huge branches, and then some twigs, and then some leaves. And to me, I have what I call tree trunk friends. I spent some time with them today. They have been friends for 30 years. They've worked in some of the same jobs for 25 years. They are super predictable. Now, I love that they love me and they welcome me, but that's not who I am. I'm not. And if I said to them, do you ever suffer from imposter syndrome? They wouldn't even know what I'm talking about.
Exactly.
They take so few risks that they just are doing what they do. Now, that's a fine person. That's not typically an entrepreneur.
No.
So my pals who suffer from imposter syndrome are usually people that are, I've got a friend who's feeding children in Africa, and someone else is, starting a shoe company. Like, they're doing amazing things, but every day they're reaching beyond whatever it is that is known to them. They're in uncharted territory. They're taking major risks. So they're living their life way out on the leaf where it is windy and breezy and you can fall down and it hurts to fall down. But my theory is like, way to go. So of course you feel, oh my gosh, I'm an imposter. I have never been able to run a $10 million company. Well, good for you for trying. Good for you for taking that step. Good for you for making those decisions. And so I am a big fan of embracing the imposter syndrome and recognizing it for what it is, because it's showing you're taking risks and you're probably doing some great things.
And I think at the end of the day, I was watching a TV show last night, actually. I thought it was quite profound. I don't exactly know the wording, but it was like, in your mind, this whatever you do is perfect, right? Yeah. But the reality is it's not. So it's the universe just leveling things up a bit in terms of getting you back to reality. And so you think you've done this, you're going to do this perfect speech, or you're going to do this perfect podcast interview, whatever, right? And the reality is that it's just the universe leveling things up a bit, because nothing's ever perfect, right? And I think that's the thing about it, is that nothing's ever perfect. There's no, I don't think any entrepreneur's ever had a run to the end and never made a mistake and never had a fall. And I think apparently in Silicon Valley, if you go in with a high-tech kind of proposal, I'll ask you how many times you failed before, because they want to see, can you pivot, can you change direction? Because generally speaking, what you ever create first never works anyway. And you look at PayPal, that came from a Palm Pilot add-on in the first place. I don't know whether you knew that, but Elon Musk actually tried to develop this Palm Pilot security software that no one wanted. Like, no one. I remember having a Palm Pilot, useless a thing it was, but the reality is no one wanted security on the Palm Pilot, because security wasn't a big issue back then. He probably was well advanced in his time, because nowadays it probably would have sold well, but back then nothing was important. So that ended up pivoting into PayPal, And so I think that's the danger, is that if you don't kind of look at it and go, well, you know, something that you start now may not be what it is down the track. And I think too, also ability to kind of fail fast. I think, like, if you're going to fail at something, you go in there on the basis of it. If it's not working, then you can always pivot to something else rather than sit there and hang on to it too long.
Yeah, and that is interesting. We used to use that same phrase, and it's hard to teach people, well, how do you do that, right? Mm-hmm. So I gave an example earlier talking to you about how just in the pivot of COVID, we came up with 3 different products. Mm. And the idea was we got to get 3 out there fast because one of them is going to fail, or maybe 2 of them are going to fail, but we want to push it out there. Another thing we often do with startups is just say, get it out there to 100 people. You know, get your minimal viable product out to 100 people. And that is the goal. The goal isn't, you know, paying off your debt or making a certain amount of revenue. The goal is we got to know fast if this is going to fail. And it's one thing to say it. It's another thing to know, well, how do you do that? Because we're wired to not intend to fail, but we want to know that you've given it a full try. And so I try to set up frameworks for what that might look like.
So the other thing I was noticing in your book talk about is your attitude determines your altitude. So What do you mean by that?
Well, there was a time I had a very stressful life. I was staring down $700,000 of personal debt. I had
I've been there. Like $500,000 at one point there of debt to pay back.
Yeah, that was a bad day, and we just talked about failure. I'm a single mom raising 3 children, and at the time, I really was working roughly 3 full-time jobs. I started really early in the morning. I would time my email so it looked like I was 9 to 5, but it was around the clock. Anyway, people would constantly say to me, I don't know how you do all that you do, and you do it with a smile. And I remember saying, because I could never do it with a frown. And that was really it. I learned, thank God, that I could what's so cool is if we're going to run a race, we're going to eat something. We're going to put some nutrients in us. We're going to drink some water. We're going to get a good night's sleep. And those are really important, wonderful things to do to prepare yourself for the challenge. What's interesting about attitude, as opposed to, you know, eating, sleeping, drinking, is those things are physical and they really only help me, right? But also putting on a smile and some cheer and a helpful attitude, that not only makes me more likely to run the race, to do what I need to do today, but it actually has an immediate impact on you. You're more happy to speak to me. You're more engaged. You're more likely to ask, hey, what can I do to help you today? You might even want to do business with me. You might even sign a contract with me. You might even send me a new employee. And so attitude is way, way more important than anything else that we can do. It's than preparation, than eating, than sleeping, than drinking. It is really the thing that has the greatest impact, not only on me and my energy level, but everyone I come into contact with. And so it's totally irrelevant if I feel happy today or if I feel overwhelmed today. We got to choose to be in control, be ready, and go get it. Because, you know, I think trying to show up with a bad attitude is like limping, you know.
And I think I've been there with, and you've probably been there too, where you go into a presentation or you go to a sales pitch, and what you're really thinking about is the fact that the money that, you know, the bank's about to foreclose on your house or whatever's happening, right? And like in some situations where I've been in that situation where basically you have to put on a big front and you have to have that attitude of like what's going on behind can be solved if you just go forward and play the game. And I think that's part of the thing is that some people will let that get to them, and then it becomes a spiral from there because you can't get beyond it. And I've had to front up in some meetings where I'd rather been, doing something totally different. But it was a necessity because you had to move the business forward. And I think that's the difference, is that people don't realize how much other people pick up on that.
For sure.
in that
People
situation.
want to be around successful people. So you got to go in there with everything you've done that's successful, where you're going to go, how much you understand them. And not, if you don't buy this from me, I go bankrupt, right? No, everyone is going to run away from that. I had a friend way back when I was in college. I spent my junior year abroad in England. And this woman said to me, how do you have the self-confidence to go to England all by yourself? I don't have the self-confidence to go to the Bilo. Bilo was like our local grocery store. And I never forgot that question, because I remember thinking, why would I let my lack of self-confidence get in my way of my desire to go? So I may not have felt confident that I was going to make it to England, that I wasn't going to get lost, that I wasn't going to lose any of my stuff, that I was going to make a friend, that I could understand the classes, whatever. But I just wanted to go. And that exact feeling of choosing to have a great attitude about it is exactly the sales situation that you're describing. Because if I sit here and I think, oh, I only have a 30% chance of making this sale, and if I don't make this one, we're not going to make payroll this month. I actually went from a 30% chance down to a 20% chance, right?
Or less even.
Or less, right? I need to go in there and feel like, and know I have the ability to solve their problem. I can save them money. I have the answers. I have the product. And really just allow a little bit of tunnel vision to get that done. And I don't know, that's really worked for me.
So the really,
and then it becomes true.
Yeah. Well, the really interesting for me is that in one of the businesses where I ended up owing a lot of money in the end, was a scenario where I was basically buying a brand new car every 2 weeks, like a nice car. I'm on payroll. It was a lot of money. In fact, we ended up having to pay payroll tax, which is like $1 million a year in payroll. So I had a big payroll to pay. And bizarrely, we were able to make payroll every fortnight when things were in trouble for nearly a year. And every time, just in the 11th hour, something would come, right?
Wow.
And I sort of believe, like, I'm not religious as such, but I believe in the fact that if you put it out there in the universe, something will come back. And it was almost like a blind faith that it would be okay.
Yeah.
And always was, and to this day, I can wake up on a Monday morning and think I need to make some money this week, and by Tuesday, someone's put money in my bank account.
No, that's
right.
Good.
And that's just attitude and basically the psychology of the fact that you know that it's going to happen. It's just a case of now it just has to happen.
Right. Well, I certainly believe whether or not if you think you're going to be successful or you think you're not, you're right. Right.
Yeah. Pretty much, yeah. What you think about is what you bring about, right? It's and I think that's the danger in that what you say to yourself while you're alone is the most dangerous words.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's, and entrepreneurs beat themselves up all the time, I think, and that's part of that failure syndrome, that imposter syndrome, all the things that sort of lay down on top of you. And sometimes you've got to like go out there and talk to someone else that actually goes, wow, I appreciate what's going on here because I can see it. Whereas the average friend, as you say, your sort of fair weather friends will always be there for you, but the reality is they won't understand what the hell you're talking about because they're not into taking risks or into that kind of mindset. So I think it's important to build that resilience, I think, and that's the danger right now, particularly in the small businesses, probably under the biggest pressure ever, in my opinion, in the world, because big corporations are safety nets, right? So you can go get a job in a big company. These entrepreneurs could quit their jobs. They could say, look, I can't see a way out of this. I'm going to go and get a job. And then you end up working for big corporations because they're the ones who only want to be left at the end of this, right? They see an opportunity, I think, in some respects, to get in there and take ownership of markets that you wouldn't normally be able to keep control of because you're too busy worrying about how you're going to survive. Well, they're actually taking your customers off you. So I think that's a danger that, I hope that a lot of entrepreneurs get that bit of, grit and say, no, I'm going to hang in there and I'm going to make sure that I don't become a statistic.
Yeah. Well, and what you say is what you say to yourself. So I often think that I've traveled to Australia, the other end of my earth. But the most important distance I've ever traveled is the 3 inches in my head, you know. And sometimes I have to do that today and tomorrow, and you have to retravel it because it's easy to slip into the news and bad feedback and stress. But I have just found that those things don't usually help me. So
no. Yeah. And I must admit, in recent times, I started watching the news, and over time, I sort of like getting to a point where I'm not going to watch that anymore. Like it's the same thing, right? Every day, it's the same thing, and you got to think, so why are they just repeating the same thing in different numbers or different ways? But the reality is, they're doing exactly the same thing to every time. And I think that's the danger, is that mindset, you can end up being in a situation where the same, you know, someone used to say that your brain is like a steel rod. The more you think about, whatever you think about, is 80-90% of every day is the same thing. So you're forming these really strong connections that are actually true or false, depending on what you're thinking. And I think that's the danger, is if you keep on reinforcing that, then you're in trouble, because it's very hard to break it after.
Yeah. I try to not think about thousands of things that I need to do, but I try to think about what can I do right now that is impactful, and just keeping moving. I don't know if this is necessarily related to attitude, but I have found with entrepreneurs, it can get easy to spin out of control. So a lot of us think about our day in sort of a pie chart. So a circle split up into all of these little pieces of pie about the 14 things that we need to do. We need to deliver our product. We need to make a sales call. We need to update our website. We need to work on our PR, whatever is the thing that this CEO needs to do. And I think it's helpful to go ahead and stick that on your pie chart. But what I have found is then we can get spinning like a roulette wheel, and we spend our time wherever the marble happens to land. And that spends things out of control. So I try to encourage people to have the exact same size, the same number of hours in the day, the same number of tasks that you have to do, but change the circle such that you have one central circle and then you have concentric circles outside. And so what I have found is if we can just get the main thing right, usually it doesn't take 50 hours a week to get the main thing right. It's usually 12, 15, 20 hours, but you get that main thing right, then you can think about the outside and the outside and the outside. And so, for example, you know, I talked about, you know, sort of long-term prospects or opening up an office, or those are the kinds of things, or a new website that can like suck all of your life out, that you, if you're on the roulette wheel, you got stuck in that and then you didn't do the main thing. And so to me, kind of switching from this roulette wheel or pie chart to concentric circles where it's like a bullseye has been a really powerful way of me channeling my focus, which has led to a more positive attitude, because it's like you get a breather. You don't feel like you're chasing down a track. You're like, I got the main thing. Now I get to try that fun thing. And sometimes I do it by the week. Oh, I need to do my main thing for my 15 hours. And sometimes I do sort of like 6 hours a day. And then I play with a reach project or wonder where this is going to lead me project for an hour or two a day. But it's still getting the main thing done. And that has really helped. It helps your mental status, because you feel like you've achieved and you feel confident and you feel like your world is going to be predictable. And you're not feeling out of control. And so that has allowed me to show up with the positive energy.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I get a lot of entrepreneurs say they're overwhelmed, and I think they've overwhelmed themselves in some respects. You haven't overwhelmed them, they've overwhelmed themselves. And I think that they're doing them, like I remember going to, speaking to a friend a long time ago, and they talk about doing the most important thing rather than the most important vital thing that's related to making money usually, you know, like, and that's the one they avoid, right? They'll avoid and do all the little jobs, and then they go, oh, well, but I've got to focus on the one important thing, keep coming back to that. And I think that's the danger, is that you can get very busy in business and basically end up getting nothing done. It's just a bunch of activity. And some of these people that I've sort of come across have said, well, my theory is that if you can do this the most laziest way, then it'll work. So rather than think about having to work, let's say I've got to work 100 hours to get this done a week, and there's no way I can do it, but they try anyway. The question I always ask myself, what's the laziest way I could get this done? And then work from that point. Because sometimes being lazy means you might enjoy it, right? Might be something you don't want to do, right? But you want to be, so pick a lazy way. And the reality is if the lazy way works, you can add more to it. You can build harder, you can work harder, but you can't work 8 days a week.
Right.
And I think that's what happens with people. They think, I'm going to put this massive amount of activity into something. They can't sustain it. It's going to catch them sooner or later because they've got other stuff to do. And so what's going to happen is you just end up with a failure again. But it's not a failure because it's a failure. It's a failure because you underestimate how much time you're going to spend on it.
Right.
And so we sort of like think, well, get a little win, don't get a big win. Start with little wins, and if it works, then build up on it. But don't beat yourself up that you couldn't work 100 hours a week to get something done, because it ain't going to.
I'm a big fan of the little win, for sure. I think that's so important. And sometimes that means breaking a big win down, right? I call it the mini sale. So I personally don't think anyone should ever sell something for $50,000 or more that if that person's never paid you. So your product may cost $50,000, but find a way that they get a taster for $3,000 to $5,000. Find whatever, if it's a consulting service, if it's, I'm going to write your book for you, if it's an online software, find, especially if you're going to try to sell something over the phone or over the internet. I'm a big fan of, sometimes it's like an assessment. Sometimes it's come talk to me for a day that I'll charge you $5,000. And so what we're immediately doing is we are saying, I'm of value, because just to spend time with me, you're going to have to pay me $5,000. But what's also happening is I'm going to try to deliver you $10,000 worth of value for that $5,000, because I'm going to do a great job, but I'm also going to get to know you. I'm going to know your weaknesses. I'm going to know the areas of your company that I need to bring my consulting in. But I'm a big, big fan of what I call a mini sale. And the reason is I have literally worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs who went bust because they said, but I have a proposal out. I have a $60,000 proposal out. And they're not getting paid for these proposals that are out there. And my philosophy is no. Don't ever give anybody a proposal for $50,000 or more unless they've already paid you $3,000 to $5,000 for the privilege of getting that proposal, because then you're going to be giving a proposal of something that's exactly what they need. You're going to give, you would have understood it. You would have done a more thorough, I call it an assessment, or some kind of like quiz, or, it's hard to say because I don't know what everybody's business is, but the nut I'm trying to solve is the entrepreneur going broke because they've got too many proposals out. They've spent too much time on proposals. And I'm not a fan of that. You got to have this small.
No, you're right. And I had a situation where I think when I was in selling accounting software, we had this telemarketer guy, and I call it the empty tray syndrome. So you start a new employee off, and he'd been there a while, and we'd taken over the business, and and he's got all these outstanding telemarketing calls. And so within a month or so, he's got a full tray of stuff. Somehow you can start a new employee with an empty tray, and within a month they're overwhelmed with work.
Yes.
And we saw it so many times. And I said to him, how many people have you got to call? And he said, well, I said, so you call 10 people a day and you've got to ring 5 back, then within a month it's unsustainable. You can't, you're too busy ringing people back to actually ring anybody new.
Yeah.
And it's like you've killed yourself, because the pure numbers are going to kill you in the end. You're not going to be able to keep up. And I said that's why you're overwhelmed right now, because you don't know what to do now. You completely put your to do this so long. And I think the danger is that, for me, when I do a proposal, for example, I'm a 95% certain that they're going to go ahead. Like, I don't give a proposal until I actually know that they're going to go ahead. Or I give a proposal because I know that that's what they want to make a decision they've already made, which is no. Right? And so in some respects it's like just a way of sort of giving them a way out of the process. But 9 times out of 10 it's a proposal that's really just the next step in the chain of what they've got to do next. And I think that's the danger people make, is I'll give you a quote and then that quote or proposal is the sales tool that they're trying to sell when they should have done all the work up front. That shouldn't be a surprise. Like, the price shouldn't be a surprise. I've seen a lot of people where they send a big proposal price and the guy just gets, ticket shock and just dies on you in the spot, right? Because he's not going to do it at all. So it shouldn't be a surprise, but also it should just be the next step. It shouldn't be the step.
No, I totally agree. You got to get the head bobbers early on.
Yeah. So if you do the work up front, you got very little to do down the track. That's the lazy way that I come up with, right? The more you talk and do the work up front, the less you have to do at the end. Mm-hmm. And if you haven't done a good enough job, then you have to go to the end and you have to try and come back from that. That usually means you're going to give them a discount. That's what usually happens, I think. And if you've got to come back from that proposal, you're probably giving them a discount to get them to go ahead.
So true. Because what happens is you start to realize, I just spent a month coming up with this proposal. I've already spent all this energy. I might as well give it to you for half the amount. And it's not even profitable at that point. Not half, but and it's so great when you talk about the lazy way, because what I've found is so often an entrepreneur says, I just need to get out, only 10% of the people I give proposals to are saying, yes, I'm going to do 30 proposals. When it's actually much better to say, why don't you just increase your percentage? Instead of 10%, flip it and get to where you're only giving a proposal to someone who's pretty much already decided they're going to work with you. Put your energy on, how do I meet those people? How do I meet their needs? How do I listen to what they want? And so I can do half as many proposals and literally get twice as many sales. And so that's, in quotes, your lazy way of going. But
yeah, because proposals can be a pain. Like I've got to the point now, proposals take me literally 30 seconds because I'm trying to find a lazy way to do it. So basically it's like I've got to do a proposal. I have to wait an hour or so before I send it because it's so quick. It's like I can't send it there. Well, sometimes I wait till the next day because it's too quick, right? And I think that's part of the process is that, I set it up for the fact that it's going to be a sale. And that's just the next step for them to do it. But also at the end of the day, you're actually controlling the process in the front as well, because you're now controlling your time. You're not dealing with someone that's not interested. I mean, occasionally I speak to someone and, at the end of the conversation, like the entire call or consultation, never ask the price. And I never tell them the price till they ask the price. Yeah. Because if they don't ask the price, they're not interested. Right? And so they may not like you, right? It might be just like you can't like everybody. So they may not just like you. So all they're really going to do is just be nice and get off the phone. So why bother trying to force the issue, right? If they're not going to ask the price, they're not interested. No point doing a proposal. It's just going to wreck my numbers, right? And so just walk away. And I've got off the call sometimes and thought, I wonder what's going to happen there. Like they're going to get off the call and think, he never tried to sell me anything. And then maybe that might twist them back. Maybe they'll come back because they go, well, hang on a minute, you never told me the price. And it's happened a few times where they've come back and said, hey, how much was that?
Yeah. Oh, that's so good.
Yeah. So I think that's so the last thing I sort of talked about, and we probably could wrap it up, is talking a bit about delegation, because I think that's a big thing with entrepreneurs is the ability to delegate or they like to abdicate. Sure. And I used to, when I used to sell accounting software, it was the really hard part, because you go into a small business and suddenly you realize how much or little they control their business by their accounting software. And then who could do things in their business and who were allowed to do things. So the whole delegation thing was all about control. In most people, most entrepreneurs who delegate want control. And that's probably the worst thing you can do, because you can't even control a 5-year-old. Honestly, you probably learned this with being a mother as well, is that you think you can control your child, you've got rocks in your head. From the day they're born, you've got no control, to the day that, if they're 21 or 25, it doesn't matter. You've still got no control. They'll do whatever they want at the end of the day. You just think you do.
You set up life to make sure they do what you want. But you have to make it their choice. So I have so much to say about delegation. One, when I talk about what an MBA taught me, our situation was they gave you so much work, it was impossible for one person to do all of the work. So we formed these study groups on, and I had the same study group, and we met for breakfast every single morning at 7 a.m. But on Monday, we would kind of divvy up the week's cases. And so I would only go deep on about 3 cases a week, even though we would be reading 10 cases. So I would read or maybe skim all 10 cases, but I would get a printed out sheet of paper from my study group partner who was responsible for that case. So we literally had to rely on each other. We had to figure out, well, Kimberly was best with numbers, but John was good on the engineering stuff, and so was good on the people skills. And so that was a great way to be forced to experience delegation as opposed to being taught it. Mm. Well, fast forward many years later, I realized the more I could give my kids, the more, I could run life as someone who was working 3 jobs and raising 3 kids. And 2, it wasn't so bad for them either, is that we live in a land, many of us, of affluenza, and kids don't have enough responsibility. And I remember a very specific day where I was on my computer and I'm busy typing in name, address, my child's shirt size so that he can be registered to play soccer. And he's about 6 years old, and he's over there in the corner playing a video game. And I thought, nope, I brought the computer over to him. And I said, you can play a sport or have an activity when you can register yourself. And so from age 5 or 6, I never once filled out a school form. I sign them, but you fill out all, you know your name, you know your address, you know your phone number, you know that Aunt Betsy's the person to call if you need someone besides your parent. And they filled out all of their forms, even when we get to the doctor's office. We get to the doctor's office, and I hand that little clipboard to my kids, and the doctors are like, what are you doing? And I got a phone call to make. I sign it all. I double check that they said, no, it was your left hand that you broke, whatever it was. I make sure the information is right. But very early on, I realized that our kids can do a heck of a lot more than we tend to take responsibility from them. And I'll finish this part on delegation with my favorite, which is my trip to Australia. Is when we decided to go for 3 months. I was going to be working and the kids were going to be an online school. And I was just leaving a very intense job. So I thought we'd park ourselves on Bondi Beach and relax. 3 months, this will be great. And my daughter, who was about to turn 16, said, oh no, Mom, I have a list of 32 cliff jumps, waterfalls, hikes, national parks. If we're going to fly 14 hours to the other end of the earth, we're going to see it all. And I said, okay, I don't have time to plan that. Here's the budget. I gave framework. I'm not willing to drive more than 6 hours in one day. Here's our budget. We need internet access. And that girl she did every email to every Airbnb for 89 days, so much so that when we showed up and the host came out to greet us, every time they shook my hand and said, nice to meet you, Savannah. And I was like, no, that's the 15-year-old you've been talking to. My name is Bea. But she planned everything. And that to me is the best kind of delegation. She was motivated and she had a framework. And that's really where we make mistakes as entrepreneurs and as CEOs, is we don't delegate early. We don't delegate often. We wait till we're overwhelmed. Yep. And then we say, I have too much that I'm doing. I have to give it to someone. And we give it to them half-baked. They have no chance of success. And then we do the stupidest thing, which is we say, I knew I should have just done it myself. So-and-so made a mistake. But it wasn't that so-and-so did it wrong. It's that we didn't set it out. And we didn't teach when we could, and we didn't do it early enough, and we didn't give framework on what would be success. It would have been like saying to my daughter, any amount of a hotel is fine, and we can do 12 hours difference, from one day to the next. No. Here's a framework. Here's a budget. Get it done.
Yeah, and I think that's give them at least some sort of box to go into to be able to figure out what's going on, because I think that's the danger. Yeah, and I mean that typically what happens is, and I've seen, and there's a book called The E-Myth that talks about this too, is where a small business operator will eventually decide that they want to hire an employee and then try and give them the jobs that they don't like.
Right.
Right, and eventually what happens is those employees don't want them to do them, so they give them back. Right, so they don't do it well, so they'll take it back, or you'll end up in a situation where you just end up saying, "Oh, I'll do that. That's easy," and they end up doing the jobs they like doing because you never had a framework to start with. You never actually had a job description to actually figure out what they were supposed to be doing. And that's probably a time-honored thing that I've seen not a lot of business have anymore, is a job description. I've only had 2 jobs in my life. I got a job working in the bank when I was 15 and worked there for 12 years, and then I applied for another job. Actually applied for 2 jobs in Sydney when I first moved to Sydney because I was going to shut my business down and move. And the second job that I applied for, the guy asked something interesting. He said, "Can you give me a job description of what you think the job entails?" All right. It was a sales manager's job. The funny thing about it, I'd already written all these job descriptions for my entire business. So one of them was sales manager. Right? So I just took it, changed a couple of things, and just gave it to him. He said, "That was the best written job description I've ever seen. You can have the job." Right. And I realised that, he hadn't, obviously either hadn't thought of a job, he wanted a job description done to see what would happen, or it was an interesting question to ask because it showed how much you understood about the job, right, to actually write a job description. And I'd say that most people who we asked to write a job description wouldn't be able to do it because they would have no clue what to do,
Right.
in what they were doing even, right? And I mean, even when we used to do interviews, we get people show up and they go, "Well, can you tell us a bit about the company you're about to, apply for?" And they have no idea. They haven't even research, right? And so I think you've got to.
It's so easy to research these days.
Yeah, I couldn't believe you couldn't even Google us to figure out who we were. So I think that's the danger is that, as you say, if you can get someone to take responsibility for something and know what the parameters are, because at the end of the day, as an entrepreneur, when you first did that, you probably made a mess of it as well. You learnt the hard way probably.
And they need to know what success is.
Mm.
And know when you've achieved success, and then you can build on to the next thing. So that's always super good.
Alrighty, so you've got a book coming out. I know you can get it. I think you said you can get it in Barnes and Noble at the moment, and eventually it'll be available in other bookstores, and that's on pre-order at the moment.
You can pre-order it on Barnes and Noble or Amazon. It's just as easy to look it up by my name, Bea, last name Wray, and then it shows up what an MBA taught me, and then the tagline is "But my kids made me learn."
Right, cool. That's nice. And so we'll also put up the links for your website and your social media. So it's beawray.com. So that's pretty easy. beawray.com. Can't speak English today. So we're grateful for you to come along and have a chat, and it was quite an interesting conversation we had, and we'll talk to you again soon.
So great. Thank you so much for having me. Really enjoy it.
Thanks, Bea.
Thanks.